Hello and a very warm welcome to Sporting Lives. I'm Jonathan Doidge, and each episode on this podcast I'm showcasing the story of somebody who has served in sport with distinction in whatever way that has manifested itself. In the case of today's guest, well, there's a little bit more of a personal connection for me, at least, not that he remembers it much. And he's a man that's been there and done just about everything in the world of football. Brought up in Leeds, he represented the club with distinction in 2 spells, trumped that with 3 spells at Sheffield United, played for England, Benfica, and several other clubs, as I'm sure we'll hear. An extraordinary career that lasted over 2 decades. It wasn't just his talent, though, for scoring goals that makes him stand out. Wealth of knowledge about the game does as well. That's come from management, from ownership, from coaching, among other roles. And that, for me, made him a go-to man when I started to plan out this series of podcasts. He holds the distinction, of course, of being the first Premier League goalscorer who made a total of 654 appearances in leagues and cups. And with an intro like that, it's pretty obvious. I'm delighted to say, welcome to Sporting Lives, Brian Deane.
How are you doing?
First of all, bring us up to date with what life is like for Brian Deane right at this moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to make things as easy as possible for myself. Having been involved in football professionally for the best part of 30 years, I've got to this point in my life where, I want to try and not have too much stress. I want to enjoy what I'm doing, and that having a young family is something that, at one stage I didn't think that it was going to be for me, but, things change and, I suppose I'm enjoying the benefits of being a parent with young kids now when, most of my friends, their kids have grown up. So, I'm just trying to be quite flexible with my time and what I do and enjoy anything that I'm doing at the moment.
We'll talk about ownership of Kosovan football clubs, I'm sure, in a little while. But let's wind it back, if we can, to the early days. And, your involvement in football and growing up around the area. I think Chapeltown was that way where home was as a nipper? Yeah,
that's right. I was born and raised in the area. My parents were first generation Windrush. Had a wonderful... From the 60s.
From which country?
Nevis, St Kitts and Nevis, but Nevis, yeah, the smaller island of the two. Had a wonderful upbringing, I have to say. I didn't know any better or worse or whatever, but it was always a happy time, and a lot of things revolved around sport at the time. I had brothers and friends, older friends of my brothers who had aspirations of doing things, but it was very hard for many of the local talent to break out of the area. I think culturally, when the people came from the West Indies and came and settled, it's quite difficult to integrate because people don't understand that, didn't want to go into the area, didn't want to go out of the area, and even the schools were everybody was kept in the same places, Primrose Hill, Elmhurst, Cowper Street. These were all schools that were in and around the area, and so there wasn't much of a mix going on. It was, mostly black kids in those areas, and then, so there wasn't a lot of integration. But I have to say, growing up, everybody knows that there wasn't a lot of television and sport and so on, but everybody aspired. We had a place called the Rec at the bottom of Jubilee. I don't know if Jubilee Hall. I don't know if you remember that. At the bottom of Chapeltown, there's where the Mandela Centre is now. There's a park, and every summer we used to go down there, and there'd be loads of kids playing games. Everybody, had to adapt. If we played cricket up against lampposts. I'm sure most people did with tennis balls and sticks, and we're in the park playing a game called Wembley, and it was a brilliant place to grow up for me. I didn't know anything better about any the differences between people and so on. So no, it was great. Went to Lincoln Green, which is where St James's Hospital is now. And then I went to Elmhurst Middle School, which was in Potter Newton Park. and then I went to Alton Grange as a high school, so it was all quite normal for me. And there were things that made you realise you were different at times, but on the whole, no, it was great. One of the things I suppose that made me realise was at 11 years of age, I went and started playing for Yorkshire Amateurs, and that was a really good experience. Myself and another kid from Chapeltown went for the trials there at John Smeaton School. A guy called Michael Phillips, who's unfortunately is no longer with us. But we made the journey together. We were the only two black kids on the trial, and from that day, Dave Cam, I remember Dave was the manager, and Dave came and said, "Listen, where have you come from, guys?" And we told him, and he said, "Oh, well, listen, from now on, we're going to come and we're going to pick you up." And that was really good. The whole kind of club at the time, Yorkshire Amateurs, was fantastic. Everybody was brilliant. And that's where my sort of like football story started, really.
Yeah, great club. Obviously, it was one of those clubs locally that players aspired to go and play at. I was fortunate playing at Pudsey Juniors, which was similar. It prided itself on developing professional players. I could probably list you a few of people who'd gone before me who always got highlighted at that club. And it was similar, wasn't it, at Yorkshire Amateurs? I remember in our sort of era, and I say this, folks, because... do I need to say this?
Go on, say what you want.
Well, we did play a few games together a long time ago. You can't remember it, but that must have been that terrible. But that was for a Leeds sort of junior representative side, where most of the team was from Yorkshire Amateurs, so no surprise that you lined up in that. I remember the Johnny Johnsons and the Johnny Whites and the Bugley in goals. Carl Goddard. In fact, Carl Goddard, there was one game that stands out. I don't think you would have played in this match, but we played at Middleton Clearing. Right. Against Yorkshire Amateurs a Saturday afternoon, which wasn't normally what we'd do. We used to play Sundays mainly, from what I can remember. And I just remember we were sort of delighted to come out of this game with a 4-0 defeat, because this guy, who I think we were about 13-ish at the time, and he was like a man compared to the rest of us, just paraded up and down midfield, and he was a nightmare to try and defend against, as I was trying to do. Obviously went on to Manchester United for a while, didn't he? And then ended up at Bradford City.
That's right. I mean, Carl was... If there was one person at the time, perhaps myself and him at Yorkshire Amateurs, but Carl was... you could tell that Carl was always going to go far pretty quickly. Like you say, he was built like a man. He had all the muscle definition and everything. Had a great left foot, reminiscent of, would you say, Ryan Giggs, perhaps, in terms of technique.
You're not far off, I don't think.
Yeah.
I know that's a big call, but seriously,
no, it was that good. It was that good. There was some good players. We had, I know Seacroft Colts had Jeff Clark, who's always been a good friend of mine. Jeff went on and got an apprenticeship at Leeds United. There was a couple of other players who went out, but the standard was really good.
Because did he not also play a few games at Seacroft yourself?
I did, I joined Seacroft Colts, I think, was it 15 or 16? One of the two, anyway, a long time ago. That's
when I can remember attempting to play against you, and your name was in the paper, quite regularly at the time. You and Tommy Henson for scoring hatfuls of goals in the sort of Yorkshire Evening Post write-up, and it was great, wasn't it, in those days, to get your name in those sort of things as well. That felt like an achievement at the time.
It was. It's funny. I went for a coffee with an old teammate last week. Funnily enough, Trevor Charner. And Trevor was like, "Oh, do you remember John Hewitt?" And
I remember playing against John quite often.
John was pretty scary as a geezer. Yeah, he was just
he was built like the proverbial outside toilet.
Absolutely.
Sorry, John, if you're.
No, John was a nice guy. Better to have him on your team, but lovely guy. I'd say some fantastic talent at the time. It was. Amazing.
And I better give him a mention as well, one of your former Leeds City Boys teammates, Stevie Scholes, because he's probably watched this now. So, Scholesy?
Yeah. Stevie Scholes, his shot was ridiculous. And it was, if you're an older person, you'll remember the Mitre multiplex balls. And if you ever got caught with one of them, you'd have the print on your leg, So, Scholesy was a great player at the time. So, no, there was... A lot of talent came out of local football at that time, and it's, if I look back, my two managers, David Cam who was a real mentor for me. He passed away a few years ago, and that was really sad. And his son Chris, who we played with as well, came over from Australia. So I got to see Chris again after perhaps 35 years. And Dave Gabbett, who was the manager at Seacroft, and Dave is a real. Still now, I see him now and again in the. I see him in and around Otley, and he's a real student of football. He loves football. He stops me in the supermarket and always talking about, what do you think of what's going on down at Leeds? And the thing is Dave was one of those guys who, I remember when I first joined Leeds, and he used to go to the games, and I learned so much from Dave. And he would give me an honest assessment of what he saw in me and in performances. And one of the things he pulled me up on was when I first went to Leeds, there was times when I was making my run into the box and I was going past the front post. And I think part of that was because there was times where, I was lacking in confidence, so I'd make my run, and instead of perhaps holding my run and having the goals, all of the goals to aim at, and run across, I'd made that run quickly, hoping to get the first ball. And Dave actually kind of pulled me one time. He says, look, Brian, he says, you want to hold your run a little bit more, so that when the ball does come across, you haven't just got a small window of opportunity with the goals. You can look at the whole of the goals. And it's those levels of detail. Dave probably won't remember that he said that to me, but it's something that I remember. And even as somebody who came to the club for a lot of money, it stayed with me, and it reminded me that this is what I need to do, and then it does affect, So nobody can tell you that you can't, even though myself, I ended up in the professional game, Dave was giving me sort of like bite-sized bits of information that stood me in good stead for my career, and I can go and give that little snippet of information to a centre forward now, and I guarantee you, in some cases, he won't be getting told that,
At professional level. And interesting that you mentioned people like Dave Cam and Dave Garbutt. We're blessed, as juniors learning our sport, that there are people willing to give us their time for nothing, and it's not great, I don't think, to criticise people who do that, but there are just some who raise it another notch, aren't there? There's something about them. Obviously Dave Cam himself played professional football, Scunthorpe, but at Leeds United as well. He used to play a bit of cricket with Chris actually, rather than football. Good opening batsman. He'd have been quite useful in your little games back there in Chapeltown, were he to have turned out. So it'd be great to talk about those old days. What was it like then growing up in Chapeltown in the sort of 70s and early 80s?
Well, it was fantastic. I mean, like I said, we didn't have a lot in terms of facilities and so on, so we had to be resourceful, So like I said, we'd have. I remember when it was the summer and you had Wimbledon on the box. What we used to do is along the end terraced houses. What we'd do is you get somebody drawing a chalk mark right across the sort of like the level of what it would be at Wimbledon, and that was the net, and then you'd play up against the wall until the owners of the house came out and told you to move on. So that was the tennis taken care of. We used to do things like we used to make our own bikes. Not sure where some of the parts came from sometimes, but we always used to find the parts to make good bikes and so on. We played a game called Champ, which consisted of 8 squares, and you had 2 touches, and you had to move up and around. All of these things were, people were being innovative at the time.
And that sort of thing stood you in good stead. I mean, I remember being, the expression I was going to use is probably not broadcastable, but quick off the mark, shall we say. When you were leaving your defender for dead in football matches, finding space.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if it's down to my parents or what, but I was certainly blessed to a degree at that level where I was relatively quick, and that's where I got a lot of my goals, and holding my skills, So at that time, there wasn't anything, we didn't have academies, we didn't have all these coaches. It was what you learnt, from your brothers or anybody else playing the game, or you were grateful. I mean, my brother told me to what I need to do is I need to practice a game of Wally, which was, you know, you'd kick a ball against the wall and then it was somebody else's goal, and he said, you need to play against right foot against left foot. And I ended up doing that quite a lot. And what I found was by the time I was playing professionally, I could go either way. It didn't bother me. I could, if I was on my left-hand side, I'd shoot with my left. If I was on the right-hand side, I'd shoot with my right. And there wasn't any kind of differentiation between the two in the end. I could cross balls with the left as much as I could cross balls on the right and so on. So, yeah, all of those, they call it 10,000 hours now, don't they? But, yeah, that's how it was in the day.
Okay, talk to me about, you mentioned school and Elton Grange and all that. What were you like at school? Because you're a bright lad, clearly. So were you an academic bright lad? Or were you sort of dash out home as quick as I can to get the football out? No. I always, it's funny because coming from the background I did, my parents were always, they had it hard, and, you know, they were always insistent that I tried my best at school, and, you know, that I always tried. You know, I wasn't always as bright. When I say academically, it wasn't so much. I always had the idea, but it was sometimes the application. You know, I was always quite bright, but, you know, if you asked me to do 10,000 words, I'd sort of like turn off after 50, you know. But, you know, I came out of school, I did okay. I've always tried to develop myself and my mind, and I think sometimes it's about putting yourself into situations that you might not necessarily be comfortable with in all the time, and adapting as a result of that. And I think football allows you to meet some very interesting people from different backgrounds, and it's about being able to go and hold your own in any company. And I've been in front of dignitaries and different people from different sports and so on. And, you know, I've noticed sometimes when people talk to you, or when I was playing so much, they would be quite intimidated by you and so on. I just think, you know, at the end of the day, at 52 years of age now, you know, the secret is just always to be yourself, whatever you do. So when you eventually get this, you got a trial at Leeds United first, didn't you? I think when Alan Clark was manager, that didn't work out for whatever reason. You might want to expand on that. But of course, then Doncaster, and I think you told me when we were talking about doing this podcast that you had to write for that trial yourself. You can't really imagine that in the days of internet and email these days, and scouts everywhere and these academies and all the rest of it. But that was the way it was for you, the old-fashioned way. But because, you know, given the fact that you did that, you clearly backed yourself to get the career that you did.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted. I was desperate to be a footballer. That's the only thing I wanted to do. I mean, when I was
that just a professional footballer, or for any particular? Did you want to be a Leeds professional footballer?
I was just wanted to be a professional footballer. You know, I never really had the opportunity to go and watch games at Elland Road or whatever. You know, I watched games on television. You know, I bought Roy of the Rovers. And my ambition was to be on the Sign Please page of that.
And that sort of surprises me that you didn't go to watch that much, because, you know, again, that snippet of you that I remember at 16, 17 was very sort of, you felt like you were really blinkered about the game, and I would have thought that you would have been going to do that, but if you had your own reasons, clearly for not.
No, I just spent most of my Saturdays and my Sundays playing, and I never ever really got the opportunity to go to games. You know, it was simple as that. You know, some people who had apprenticeship, who had signed for schoolboy forms, you know, they got to be ball boys and so on. But there was never really anybody who was, you know, I never got to go to games. Hardly ever. I can count on one hand the amount of games I went to as a kid. I think I went to watch Leeds versus Aston Villa, and again, I remember that Leeds had lost 3-1 at home. Gary Shaw had scored. Terry Connor, who I grew up with in the area, had got some tickets for his dad and my brother and his brother. So that's, you know, the level of how many games I went to watch.
Terry Connor, remember the beautifully side-parted sort of short afro.
A bit like my side party now, I bet, yeah.
Well, I remember you with a flat top in the
I've had all sorts.
16, 17 period, yeah.
I'd take that now.
Well, maybe I'm just blessed, I don't know. Anyway, it's great talking about the old days, as I say, but let's talk about the Doncaster thing, and just getting your footing going in professional football.
Yeah, so basically what happened to me was I broke my leg when I was 16, playing local football down at the Rec down at Chapeltown for Yorkshire Amateurs against Mandela Centre, and you know, I was
used to have some tasty games against the Mandela Centre on Scott Hall Park.
Boy, those guys, and I knew all of them, you know, because I went to school with all the guys. But it was, you know, there were some really strong, powerful boys. You know what I mean? And I remember at the time what had happened was I'd been put through, and you know, as a ball went over my shoulder, I took a stride on, and then I'd got tackled from behind, and I remember spinning over, and I could see my ankle flopping in the air as I came back on the floor, and then I straight away I could feel the pain just gripping my ankle, and realised that you know what had happened was I'd broken my fib, and dislocated my ankle, and it was one of the guys who was actually a schoolmate of mine, which was really sad. It took about 8 months, 7-8 months to recover from that. And the first thing I did was, because I still had this dream, I was devastated, because at the time it was a year when everybody gets their apprenticeships and so on. And I actually wrote down to Doncaster for a trial. I'd written down to several clubs. I went down to Barnsley on trial, didn't get anything. Went down to Notts County, played in a game, and I did all these things on my own. When you know, you would, I mean, I'm not sure about going on a bus or a train at that. If I look at it now, you know, it was something that, you know, to do that, it really showed that I wanted to actually play. And I went down, and you know, I got a lot of rejection. Went down to Bradford City, got rejected there as well. When I was at Leeds, I went down to Leeds, and at the time it was because I was perhaps the brightest prospect in the year group, and I was going on trial with guys who were 2 years older than me and so on. And it was when was Peter Barnes there? I think it was the year Peter Barnes got signed. For £900,000.
So early 80s then.
Early 80s, and there was Lyndon Simmons was there. There was a few other players I can't remember off the top of my head, but I was the youngest one, and it was very hard in that environment to really show anything, and nothing came of that. So when I wrote a letter down to Doncaster asking for a trial, and got a reply, and it turned out it was Dave Blakey, who had been the chief scout at Leeds at the time, and I was overjoyed. Went down there, and he welcomed me with open arms. Billy Bremner was the manager, and John Benson, I think, was the first team coach. And so that was me. Steve Beagle-Hull was the youth team coach, and obviously I went and trained with the youth team then. And as it happened, Billy Bremner got the Leeds job, and he came over, and I think did he bring Mickey Nesbitt here from Doncaster? I can't remember. But anyway, it was Dave Cusack who gave me my first contract. And Dave obviously saw something. You know, I was very raw. I was long and skinny, and you know, and obviously there was a lot of development to take place from that point of view. But obviously, I showed enough for him to kind of think, well, this boy's got a chance. Gave me my debut when I was 17, so that meant I didn't have to be an apprentice, which I was happy about, because it meant I didn't have to do the changing rooms and all that stuff.
I thought you were going to say that, yeah.
Yeah.
And so things take off there, and then, you know, you end up with 3 spells at Sheffield United, but the first one was, you know, stellar stuff. Yeah. Is that your golden period, if you like, in terms of your memory? When you think back about your football career, is that the one that you go back to when, you know, maybe you've had a bad day and you're trying to get to sleep at night, and, you know, you're trying to get yourself off with a good memory?
Get off.
Just get yourself off to sleep with a good memory.
I don't know, really. I've got some great memories all round. I think, obviously, that spell, for me, it wasn't a job. It was just, I couldn't believe I was doing what I actually wanted to do. And, you know, when you make no mistake, when you're in a position like being a professional footballer, you think that you're immortal. You think that you can't think about anything outside of what is going on in your life. It's that good. That's all you want to focus on, and that's all I did focus on from a point of view of this was just the best thing ever. You know, it's a little bit different to now because there was, we weren't pampered, anything like that. And I'm not saying that people are pampered now, but it was tough, you know, and we were tough. We needed to be resilient to get where we got to.
That's an interesting point, actually, because, I mean, we come from a generation watching the game, 70s, Leeds, dirty Leeds and all that. Yeah. And the way the game was played is what I'm driving at. Right. And when we were growing up in the 80s. Yeah. So you start playing your professional career during that period, but then you go right through beyond all the diving around and getting a card for having a look at an opposing player and that sort of thing. What are your feelings on all that? Is football better as it is now, or was it better then?
It's difficult. I mean, it's never good to compare the two. I mean, you look at what the pitches were like back in those days. You can't. It's incomparable. You know, managers would say that they don't want their players to play on those pitches now because they'd be scared for injuries and so on. And that's because they've grown up with better facilities. It's as simple as that. The only time we knew that we were at a good pitch was if we got to a semi-final as a kid growing up, because that's when, you know, you went to the county pitch or whatever, and the nets looked immaculate and you were kind of dreaming of scoring goals and so on. So that's, you know, but now it's totally different because they have that. They go into clubs now and the academy facilities are first class, you know, so it's totally different. It's probably not fair to compare, but the game was a lot more physical in them days. I do not like the rolling around and all of that kind of stuff. I think that when I was a manager, my players knew that I didn't want it, because my view is that your players carry your identity onto the pitch. And if you have that mindset, you know, if you want to be the pantomime villain, then, you know, your players will act accordingly. You know, if you want, you know, okay, I'll give you two examples. If you look at Leeds and Sheffield United now, and you look at the managers, and you say, right, okay, you can understand that the players, that the personality of the managers reflects the way how they play, the way how they act. You know, it's as simple as that. And I've seen players who get away with things, for example, and perhaps that's a reflection of the coach that they work for.
Great times. Just popping back to Sheffield United, and of course all of that led to the first Premier League goal, which of course on the field at the time you wouldn't have realised you'd scored, would you? Unless there was an announcement that is the first ever Premier League goal. Well done, Brian Deane.
No. I mean, I think the first time I realised that it was a first goal was when I was walking in at half time, and one of the guys come up to me and they said, "Oh, Brian, I think you did get the first goal by about a minute or 2 minutes," and it never really dawned on me for a long time that it had any kind of significance. And then I finished playing, and that's when people start coming up to me, or maybe people were talking about it, but you know, I didn't really think too much about it. And then the older it's become a bit of a legend thing where, oh, you scored the first goal in the Premier. I'm like, yeah, and that was so long ago, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, if you'd have scored 100 goals in a season for Sheffield United, somebody will score 101 one day. That record is there to be broken, but you can never break a first.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I was doing an evening in Sheffield last week, and they had the first ball there. So the ball from the actual game, and it's apparently you can buy it or whatever, and it's got all the signatures on from everybody there. And it's funny, I got 2 goals that day against Man United, and somebody came up, and I never even thought of this. They said, "Oh, that's the ball, but just think if you'd have got another goal." I actually had a goal disallowed But I'd have had that sat at home now because I've got all my other balls at home that I scored hat-tricks with. So that would have been there as well. You know, can you imagine that? It's worth a fortune, apparently, if somebody's going to pay it anyway. But, yeah.
Well, you've got it, you know. You can
I haven't got
yourself.
the God, you're crazy.
Well, it was still an achievement that nobody's ever going to take away from you, as was playing for England, which came during that period at Sheffield United, which was clearly a reflection on how well you were doing. You had that great partnership with Tony Agana. It'd be remiss of us not to mention him, because every time there seemed to be, I can remember watching Calendar and Look North and whatever else at the time, and it always seemed that Brian Deane and Tony Agana came in the same breath. And pretty much you did.
Got a song as well. I mean, Tony was great for me. I mean, Tony's a couple of years older than me, but he was, I remember the first game of the season we played Reading, and my partner for the day was a guy called Francis Joseph, and Francis got did his hamstring, and Tony came on, and obviously from there it went, we went viral. I mean, I think it was maybe 2-3 games into that season afterwards that we beat Chester 6-1 in what's the equivalent of the League One now, and I scored a hat-trick in the first half and he scored one in the second half. So I've got the match ball at home, and I know.
Is he not a bit?
No. Look, me and Tony got a great relationship, as you say, and the good thing about playing with somebody like Tony was that if I wasn't scoring, he was scoring. And I remember at the end of that season, we got promoted to the Championship, what is now the Championship, with Wolves, and for the last kind of 6 or 7 games, Tony actually carried me, because I was a 21-year-old boy, and I think that season, in fact, I got 30 goals that season. I was 21, and but Tony seemed to get stronger and stronger, and at the end of the season he finished with 30 as well. But I do remember my performances had dropped off a little bit through tiredness and so on. So it was good having somebody who was going to carry me, and it was actually, Dave Bassett actually said, Tony's, it's to be expected. You're a young kid, but it was great to have somebody there who kind of looked after me like that.
People watching, listening can probably identify with this. At whatever level they've played and at whatever sport, there's often somebody, maybe more than one person if you're lucky, who you've got a great rapport with. It doesn't matter if you've not seen him for 25 years. You drop back in right on the spot. Whenever you next see them, as if you've never been away. Would Tony be that man in your eyes, in your football career, or somebody else?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Tony's... we had a chat the other day, and, obviously, if you look at it and you look at the clubs that I played for, I had it'd be fair to say I had a better career than Tony. But, we were having a chat, and I said, look, Tony, you mean a lot to me. You're like a big brother. And... I always feel like I've got 2 big brothers, but in terms of, away from that Tony was always, and is always, somebody who, whatever I do, I'll report back to him, I'm proud, and he was a little bit taken aback, to be honest, but it's true, when you've got that much respect for somebody, and I said, look, I really appreciate you as a friend and what you've done for me, and it's a sincere friendship. I have other friends, but Tony was the first one, and he's the one who kind of, I always want to kind of be happy that he's proud of me as well.
Certainly sounds like he is, and it certainly would have been, I'm sure, when you got the nod to play for England. You walk out at the Mount Smart Stadium in Auckland, June 1991, something like that, to play against New Zealand in your first match. But what was it like when you first got the call, and what was it like working with Graham Taylor? Did you not like that?
Terrible joke.
I'm full of them.
You hear all week, yeah? No, listen, I remember my first game for England was in a B International down at Watford against Iceland, and they had something like 1,000 Sheffield United fans came to watch me, which was unbelievable. And I played I came on in the second half. I think Tony Dorigo was playing, and Lee Chapman was playing as well. And then we had a B international against Switzerland at Walsall at the Bestcott. Is that the new stadium, the Bestcott? Yeah, so that was around the time that stadium was built. And then after the game, Graham Taylor came up and he said, "Oh, I'd like you to come to Australia with us." And I got to be honest with you, my first thought was I pooed in my pants, because I was like, what? Me? You know, and you had people who were there already established, like, you know, your Stuart Pearces, your Des Walker, all of these guys, Webb, Gary Lineker. You know, it was, I was just a lad from Leeds, you know, and it was like, what?
Which surprises me a bit, because you were, you know, I would have thought you were quite a self-confident person by now in your career.
Yeah, but, you know, I think I'd taken that many knockbacks during my time, you know, rejection from going for trials. I'd been on loads of trials, and, you know, there were times where I was on these trials and I could see that I was better than other players there, but they weren't interested in taking me on. And I was like, you know, so when you're never sure after that, it knocks your confidence. But yeah, look, I mean, that's one of my failings throughout my career, I think. I remember Gary Pallister told my brother Tony, he said, "Listen, if your brother understood how good he was, you know, he could have done I could have done anything." And it's on reflection, it's, you know, there were times where, you know, my confidence was affected, like when I first came to Leeds, and then, you know, the first season for me was a horrible season in that I found it really hard to settle and you know, into the way the side played, how they wanted me to play, and all the rest of it. And, you know, after a fair bit of self-reflection after the first season, I went home, and in the summer I had an argument with my brother Tony, and he said, "Listen, you know, the way how you are, you know, you come and you argue with me, you want to take that out on some of them who you actually play with." And I thought, you know, he's right. You know, if I've got issues, you know, if things are bothering me, that's where it should be. You know, don't take it out on your family. You know, and I went back, and the second season I thought, listen, I am the centre forward here. I am the one who, you know, people should be serving things up for me, not the other way around. You know, I can't go and do somebody else's job. You know, and if anybody wants to kind of put that to the test, come and see me. And that's when my fortunes turned round at Leeds.
So that was a state of mind, really, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're right, because I'd done a lot already before I came to Leeds. You know, and I'd played for England, I'd done all of these things, and then instead of going out there and actually bossing it, I kind of thought, well, I'm going to go and fit in with people. You should never do that. You know, and it was wrong of me. And if I look back now, you're right, I should have been, because of what I'd done, because of what I was capable of doing, I should have been more demanding. And I think as a centre forward, you have to be that. You have to do that.
So things became more successful at Leeds. We'll go with that while we are, because we were talking about England originally. We'll pop back to that in a minute. But that's that spell, 4 years before you end up going back to Sheffield United and working alongside Howard Wilkinson. Yeah, I was at Leeds for 4 years working with Howard. Yeah. How was that? What was that relationship like? A bit indifferent, if I'm honest. There were times where, look, I mean, I have the full respect for Howard, but, you know, there were times where I felt that I wasn't given, you know, I wasn't played right, or, you know, look, he's a manager. At that time, I think, you know, you do what you're told. But there were times, you know, for example, the cup final where, you know, I'd scored 2 goals against Everton the week before. I got man of the match. We drew 2-2. We played a weakened side, and yet still, I knew when I went back in that changing room that I wasn't going to be playing. You can't tell me, you know, as a guy, you know, if you ask me why we haven't had an indifferent time, it was because perhaps I was too much of a team player at times, and you know, that was one of the biggest disappointments of my life. How did he approach that with you? I mean, was there a full and detailed explanation as to what his thinking was, or was it just suck it up type of thing?
I think I knew. I'd scored, like I say, in them days, you used to get this Barclays man of the match. I had a magnum of champagne right by my seat. I remember, we played a weakened team, so a lot of players were rested. It was myself, people like Mark Tinkler, John Pemberton played. I think Thomas Brolin played, if I'm right, I can't remember. But anyway, we were expecting, it was at Elland Road, I think we were expecting to kind of get beaten. It was a time when Everton had the kind of dogs of war. That was Joe Royal had this team, and yeah, we drew 2-2. I scored 2 goals, and when I came in at the end, I was really happy because I'd had some words before the game had started, I just could tell from the body language that I wasn't going to be playing.
That is, it's got to be very tough to take. So when they go and play Villa in the final, 4-0,
3-0,
3-0. Yeah, my apologies. I guess you're only human if you sat at the side or wherever you were. Did you actually go to the final? But you're only human if you sit there thinking, what do I care?
I think I cared, but I was more angry than anything. And I remember one of because the crowd gave the gaffer Howard, they gave him some ridiculous stick on the way back to the changing rooms. I remember they were singing, "It's time to go." Wilco, it's time to go, and I was really upset from a personal point of view because I felt that sometimes when things like that happen, you almost feel humiliated, and I felt humiliated the fact that I'd scored some goals and then I didn't fit into the plans for the final. I remember one of the lads, no names mentioned, had said, "Oh, I feel sorry for Gaffer," and I said, "Hang on a minute," I said, "You know who I feel sorry for? Me." I said I'd scored 2 goals last week, and and basically I thought, I'm having a go here. I'm not just going to sit here and just accept it. I know everybody was disappointed, including the manager, and I suppose on reflection, it's probably one of the most disappointing things that's happened to him because he achieved so much at this club. But that was a day to forget for the club, and I know the supporters were upset. And I'd got into my mindset then that if anybody, I just thought if anybody comes and have a go at me about anything, they're just going to get it back because this isn't a time for me to be Mr. Diplomatic. I am not in that mood.
And understandably. So that's 1996, 3 years into your 4-year stint there. Was that the sort of, if you like, beginning of the end of that relationship, or was it already?
Well, ordinary? If you look at the way another selfless act by myself. We changed formations, and I'm not going to lie, it was a bit of a masterstroke by the manager because we brought in Tony Agana and I played in a wide position. And Tony came. Tony was in the system works. We played like a 4-3-3 rather than a 4-4-2. And I'm not going to go into details of tactics or whatever, but it worked for us. We worked really well. Anybody who went out to Monaco will tell you that was one of the best games. That this. Don't get me wrong, Lee got to the semi-final at another time, but that was a hell of a performance, with some very good players on our side. And we went to Monaco, beat them 3-0, and they had some French internationals in the team and so on. I played out of position. I did it for the team. And then I remember when the manager changed the formation again, he dropped me. And just kind of, for me, it was a took the mick basically.
You can clearly detect that frustration in your tone and your body language there, and so it is frustrating, isn't it? It's your professional job to play in a certain position. You play out of position for the team. You don't get the opportunity to show what you can do in your rightful position, and then you get left out.
Exactly, and it happened a few times. I ended up doing doggies. I mean, I'm 6'3", 6'4". I'm playing on the left wing because I can play with my left foot. I'm both footed, and I'm chasing fullbacks. You know what I mean? You tell me what's better. You're gonna get somebody and play to their strengths, and give the defenders a problem, or you're gonna go and you're gonna get that person to track back. Who scored all them goals. So, yeah, you can turn around and say, well, if you're playing in that position, that's what you got to do, but. You've got to be better than that. I'm sorry.
Tony Agana, you mentioned him.
Yeah.
He was a player.
Tony was a great player, man. He was. He did some things that were just some of the best memories I remember seeing him do things in training. He used to do things in slow motion, it would seem, but he was so explosive, and I saw one of my favourite. I was telling somebody about this the other day. One of the favourite goals that I seen him score was up at St James's Park, where we were under the cosh for a long period of time against Newcastle, and we broke out on a counter, and long ball got paid into Tony, and he was the only one up. I think he'd sprinted past the centre back, and Pavel Cernicek had come out, and he took it round Pavel Cernicek, and from about 30 yards, he was running towards their goals with his hands in the air before he'd scored, and then he tapped the ball in, and I was like, I tell you, it was amazing, because if that was me, I'd have just got there as quickly as I can, focused. But that was the confidence of the guy. Yeah. I mean, that Leeds side that we had was, it was amazing. Carlton Palmer in the midfield. Talk about energy. Gary Speed, Gary McAllister, myself, Tony, Rod Wallace, sometimes Noel Whelan, Gary Kelly, Tony DeRigo, and the centre-backs, John Newsom, Chris Fairclough.
And Weather's still playing, David
Weatherall as well. And that team was, the pace in that team was frightening. There was, the second half of that, I remember... one of the things that I did was I'd been working with a fitness conditioner when I was at Sheffield United, and that was one of the things I changed in my second season, and I went down and I started going to Don Valley and working from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays on my own. I used to do the ladders. I had a weights program. I was lifting some ridiculous weights at one point, something like 200 pounds.
I can't remember you being muscled up particularly, but... No,
but what had happened was I'd actually...
Baggy shirt, was it? Baggy shirt.
Baggy shirts, yeah. Have you seen the shirts from there? But the thing was, I was working with a guy called Ed Baranowski, and what actually happened that second season was I was working on my own down there, and then the lads saw how things had started going, and the first one to come down with me was Rod. And Rod said, yeah, I'd like to come and do a little bit more. And then we had others. Carlton came down, John Pemberton came down, Gary Speed came down. I think even David O'Leary came down for a couple of times as well. But the thing was, we were doing things that not a lot of other teams were doing. And that had started. I'd started working with Ed 3 years previously at Sheffield United. And there was a time where we had 4 points at Christmas, and we actually got Ed to come in. And this was Dave Bassett being very creative, and we started working on our strength conditioning and our nutrition. And for the second half of the season, we blitzed it. We went from 4 points. I think we finished about 11th or 12th. And that's because nobody else was doing the kind of training we were doing. And we were, I could see we're finishing games really strong. My last game for Sheffield United, we beat Chelsea 5-0 at home. We beat Spurs 6-1. We beat somebody else 5. We regularly used to beat all the top teams.
And so you buy into that as a playing squad.
Yeah,
if you can see the results.
Yeah.
Aha, surprise. Yep, I've cut in at this moment because that is the end of part 1 of episode 5 of Sporting Lives with my special guest Brian Deane. Brilliant to hook up with Brian again after so many years in my case, and relive the old days and also loads of his professional career. But the half-time whistle has just gone. All the second half still to come, so stick with us on Sporting Lives for that. Coming next, then part 2 of the Brian Deane story. Now, to be able to get that, you need to subscribe to YouTube, so please go to the YouTube channel and click subscribe, and you'll get notification of when I release part 2. Similarly, you can also follow these podcasts on audio only format if that's what you prefer to do. So even if you're watching this for the first time and you want to hear the audio format, then you can go to Podbean and look for Sporting Lives with Jonathan Doidge, or you can also go to iTunes and look for the same Sporting Lives with Jonathan Doidge. Notifications as well on Twitter, on @SportingLives1, and also on Facebook on @SportingLives1, and you can hook up with me on there and follow what I've got to say. Plenty of little clippets coming up from episode 2, just to give you a taster of what's to come, but loads of Brian Deane's second half of his career, Middlesbrough, the likes of West Ham United, further spells at Sheffield United, and of course Leeds United, and then that transition into management and club ownership. Loads more, you won't want to miss it. Stick with me on Sporting Lives with JD.